HELMER, donc Seven Powers, The Foundation of Business Strategy. Mais pour l'instant, en 3-4 minutes, on voit Something Ventured.
Accidental entrepreneur.
You have to be a street fighter.
We didn't know what we were doing.
Silicon Valley, technical breakthrough.
$100,000.
$1 million. $10 billion.
Intel,
Apple,
Genentech,
Cisco, good markets, great company.
I call myself the accidental entrepreneur.
You have to be a street fighter.
We didn't know what we were doing.
Silicon Valley, technical breakthrough.
$100,000.
$1 million. $10 billion.
Intel,
Apple,
Genentech,
Cisco, good markets, great companies,
Growing companies.
Sky's the limit. The rest is history.
The company was started with $250, and so we never had any money. You have to be brave.
These are very fragile companies with a lot of things missing.
Any new business seldom does what's written in the business plan.
the risks were just enormous.
You could walk down the street in 1976 and talk to 100 people and say, would you like a personal computer? And they go, well, what's that?
Jobs and Wozniak came up to see me, and they were very unappealing.
They were bearded, they didn't smell good, they dressed funny.
Yeah,
But Woz had designed a really wonderful computer.
I was convinced it was a big market just embryonically beginning.
When you see it, you know it. It's just, that just goes right through your bones.
At the time we started Genentech, there was no such thing as genetic engineering. I said, what if God or Darwin won't let us make a new life form? But we had our breakthrough.
It was a new idea, but it was a good one.
if they hadn't stayed together, probably there'd be no silicon in Silicon Valley.
Well, isn't it great if you can make money and change the world for the better at the same time?
Alors, c'est un petit film que vous pourrez retrouver par vous-même. C'est un film tout à fait exceptionnel parce que c'est des interviews en tête-à-tête avec les premiers ventures capitales de la Silicon Valley, les gens qui en investissaient, par exemple, dans Apple, alors que c'était une petite start-up avec 3 personnes. Et ils racontent très bien la première venue de Steve Jobs dans leur bureau. Et ils disent même en détail que Steve Jobs ne sentait pas très bon, donc ce n'était pas très rassurant pour eux d'investir sur cette petite boîte absolument inconnue qui était Apple, qui est devenue, comme vous savez, une des plus grandes capitalisations de la planète en quelques années, après des hauts et des bas d'ailleurs, une vie tout à fait particulière de Steve Jobs, qui est considéré aujourd'hui comme un des plus grands innovateurs de tous les temps, sinon en tout cas des États-Unis. Donc, merci beaucoup de cette vidéo que nous avons pu retrouver sur Internet et que vous pouvez retrouver sur Internet en détail. Il suffit de taper son nom et aujourd'hui, elle est en accès public. Elle est devenue un documentaire historique sur un des moments clés de la Silicon Valley. Alors maintenant, on fait un bascule de 30 ans avec Hamilton HELMER. Hamilton is online with us now. Hamilton, do you hear me?
I do indeed, Michel.
Okay, fantastic, hi. Hamilton. So Hamilton is first, I must say, we meet Hamilton we meet in a gathering. So our first period of relation was just a friendship. And little on little, I discovered that I had the chance to meet one of the best thinkers of the Silicon Valley, Hamilton. And we are going to speak later on by Hermann Gier also, who are completely different kind of thinker. But both you become one of my best friends in the world. So thank you, Hamilton, to be with us. Your time is always very busy. You could tell us what you are going to do after. I don't know if you can tell it, but it is amazing considering what you said. We said later. What are you doing to do after this meeting? Can you tell us? Is it secret or not?
No, it's not secret. I'm one of my Stanford students who's quite brilliant has started a blockchain company called Dapper Labs. And they're doing some I don't know if you've read about CryptoKitty, but it was one of the things that was a very high volume blockchain application, which is unusual. And they're building a business around that and trying to redo the internet. The blockchain in a way that's more suitable for large volume transactions. And it's very exciting. So we have a board meeting right after this.
So it is 7 a.m. in California right now. You are the writer of this fantastic book, 7 Power. I made an interview. I was one of the very first to make an interview about your book.
You were indeed. You were indeed.
And I have even your writing paper about your book. So I'm very happy to receive you. You are in California. So can you tell us the 7 secrets of the Silicon Valley?
Yeah, my whole career has been around the issue of what makes companies succeed in the long term, which is really the subject of strategy. How do you build a terrific company that produces great results for a long period of time? And that's been a long journey. I've had my own consulting firm for a long time. I've taught it at Stanford. I run an investment principal fund that's based on understanding company strategy. And the bottom line of it is that if you look at companies, what you find is that good results are serially correlated. That is to say, if Apple had a good quarter this year, next quarter it's not a random draw. It's highly related to this quarter. And so what you look for in strategy are those structures that create that persistence. And that's what the 7 powers are those 7 structures. But then when you go a step deeper, and this relates back to your work, Michel, when you go deeper and you say, okay, well, there's 7 structures like scale economies and counterpositioning and so on. How do you get there? And then what you realize at that deeper level, that it all ties back to creativity. Strategy starts with a creative act, whether it's developing a product or a business model or a brand or something like that. So I think that's my take on all this. And then that gives you a very different view on strategy. You realize that strategic planning is great for planning, but has almost nothing to do with strategy, and so on. And so you have to go back to that first creative act and understand what that implies.
So one secret is creativity. That is. And thank you to begin by this, because without creativity, there are just nothing. Even the world don't exist. The Big Bang was a huge act of creativity by God. I don't know by who. But then let's speak about the second kind of secret you are speaking in your book.
Yeah. So if you look at these structures that create this economic this persistence of good returns, it's in principle, it's pretty simple. What you need is something that does something that's valuable. So so you can look at that even from a financial point of view. So it lowers costs or increases prices, and it might be with a new product or whatever. And then you need something that that protects that from competitive arbitrage. So you need what Warren Buffett would call a moat. So if you look at Netflix, for example, which I've had a long association with, I've actually trained a lot of the top 100 people there in strategy. They started, as I say, with a creative act on streaming. I mean, they went, there's a red envelope business before that, but they created this idea of we're going to not have people wait for next week's episode, and we're going to do it all over the internet. And they started streaming, and that was valuable to people. People liked the immediacy of that and convenience and all those nice things. So something valuable. But then they had to figure out a way that enabled that to be competitively strong, because it's so valuable. Of course, other people are going to do it. That's the nature of human nature, is they'll try and compete away that profit, and that's good for people in general. And in Netflix's case, it was that they made the quite innovative and bold and difficult move to go into original content. And everybody's going, what are you doing going into original content? You don't know anything about that. You're a tech distribution business. But original content, of course, has a fixed cost. And that fixed cost, if it's prorated over more users, so if Netflix has 10 times the users of Hulu and they do House of Cards for $100 million, the cost per user for Hulu, if they did the same thing, would be 10x. So that would be scale economies. That's one. And at the same time they had that, but when they started this, HBO was a much bigger competitor and much more secure and financial and high reputation, all this. And HBO, they had a different one of these powers, which is called counterpositioning, which means that for HBO to do a different business model. So each of these powers, I'm not sure you want me to go through all 7 in such a short period of time, Michelle, but each of them has this characteristic of a benefit, something that's better about the business model, but a barrier also. Some reason that competitors either can't or won't take you on competitively. And if you think, and the nice thing about it is, as far as I know, there are only 7 of them. So that makes it easier to think about the problem.
Thank you very much, Hamilton. So it is amazing to understand these 3 key. We have already 3 key. You will need to read all the book to know the 4 other, because we are not going to give you all the secret right now. You need to buy the book of Hamilton.
Yeah,
that is very important. It costs only $20 to become a billionaire, so it is a very cheap object. So I am a good seller.
But Michelle, I should comment, because it connects to all your ideas about creativity, about the purpose of the book, really.
Yes, thank you, Hamilton.
Yeah, so if you go back to this idea that, so Netflix couldn't have gotten scale economies without creating this great product, right? Without having streaming. And so you go back to the question, okay, well, as thinking about strategy, what can you contribute to that? It's, I'm a Schumpeterian, so I believe in, the tremendous vitality of entrepreneurs and how that contributes to economies. And so how can you help this person? It's not like they'd hire me and I'd come in and tell them what to do, because I wouldn't know all the details and I couldn't invent the product and all that. And so strategy then comes back to what you want to do is you want to provide them with a framework so that the people on the ground, the entrepreneurs themselves, can have an idea of what creates these positions of power. And as they're going through space and time, and this competitor pops up and the technology changes and they realize customers don't want what they thought they want, all these things are happening in this high flux. They have these guideposts of, oh yeah, well, if I do it this way, then that's likely to result in power, and this way isn't. And so you have to provide them with a cognitive frame, and that's what my book is about. And I've been very pleased that tech founders have found it that way. They've many of them strategy dialogues with me because they find it's just a useful cognitive frame. So it's less ambitious than me telling them what their great strategy is. It's actually providing them with a way for them to think about it. The usual metaphor is teaching to fish.
Thank you, Hamilton. So perhaps I just translate in French the key idea, because I think your interview is very important, and even for the French people who don't speak English, I translate, if you agree, a few minutes. Alors,
oui. C'est dommage, je ne parle pas beaucoup de français.
Merci, Hamilton. Alors, Hamilton, tout de même, il adore le bon vin français, hein, je vous signale. Donc, on prendra un bon vin avec lui la prochaine fois qu'on ira le voir. Non, alors les 7 Power, il a dit ces 3 idées clés, c'est 1, la créativité. Alors ça, c'est omniprésent dans toute la Silicon Valley. C'est vraiment le pays de la créativité. Et dans une grande mesure, pourquoi autant de créativité là? C'est parce que sans doute, c'est des émigrés, c'est une multitude de cultures qui se mélangent. C'est un pays neuf où il n'y a pas de barrières, où les gens sont très amicaux, vous arrivez, ils veulent vous aider, etc. Donc il y a une très bonne atmosphère de soutien mutuel, et ça aide la créativité de chacun. Et donc, il rappelle que la créativité est une des clés essentielles. Après, il parle d'une chose qui est extrêmement importante, qui est omniprésente dans la Californie, c'est est-ce que le projet peut scaler, est-ce que le projet peut se développer très rapidement. C'est très différent de lancer, passer à l'échelle, changer d'échelle. Est-ce qu'on peut passer d'un consommateur à 1000 consommateurs, à 1 million de consommateurs, à 1 milliard de consommateurs? Google a 7 milliards d'utilisateurs, c'est effarant, enfin 6 milliards, puisqu'on est 7 milliards, mais il y a aussi des machines qui sont utilisateurs de Google, donc ça fait beaucoup plus de milliards que d'êtres humains. Mais, et après, il y a l'idée qu'au-delà du scaling, quelqu'un qui est créatif et qui grandit très vite, comme a été le cas de Netflix, pourquoi à ce moment-là, ce projet ne serait pas copié par tout le monde, y compris des gens beaucoup plus riches que cette petite start-up qui est en train de faire quelque chose d'extraordinaire? Eh bien là, c'est là qu'interviennent les barrières à l'entrée. C'est extrêmement important d'y penser au début, parce que les gens pensent souvent à la réussite, pensent à se développer, mais n'introduisent pas de barrières à l'entrée. Par exemple, Google a eu des stratégies de barrières à l'entrée très, très intéressantes, parce qu'elles étaient contre-intuitives, elles étaient basées sur de la low-tech, alors que tout le monde les attendait en high-tech. Or, je reviendrai peut-être là-dessus ultérieurement, mais Google a eu des stratégies extrêmement innovantes. Thank you very much, Hamilton. So I have translated a little what you said, the 3 keys that we have already learned. So thank you very much. Creativity, the barrier, entry barrier, how you say, entrée barrière?
Yeah, so creativity itself is not the barrier, but it is.
Yes, we need to have barrier, and then the scale, the scale up. And perhaps we can move on the 3 next powers quickly.
Sure. So I mentioned HBO and Netflix earlier, so I'll just give you that an example of counterpositioning. So counterpositioning is very interesting.
That is very interesting.
It's a very interesting one and very common in these situations and technology. If a newcomer, so an entrepreneur, for example, creates a business model that for an incumbent to mimic damages their current business dramatically, then they'll choose not to do it. And for a long time. So in the case of HBO with Netflix, they had a model where they sold at great profit their service over cable TV. And for them, and if they thought about streaming directly to customers, the cable companies are going, you can't do that. You know, you're off our cable if you do that. And so the threat to their current profits was very high. And so they just waited forever. And typically they wait too late. And so that's very common in the technology world. Think of Apple overtaking Nokia. Same issue. So Apple was the iPhone was a startup, was a software play basically, and Nokia was a hardware company. Very incredibly successful had a business model and supply chains all tuned to getting the very best hardware, and they were terrific at it. And Apple came in and Nokia would have had to blow up their business model to mimic them. What's going on in the automobile industry right now? So Tesla is primarily a software play, and and VW realizes that, and there's a fight going on there about whether what will happen, because they realize that they have to take a software-centric approach to automobiles, and so that's a situation where somebody really understands and is trying to react appropriately. So that's one. So I mentioned scale economies, which is, that's something that economists know about for a long time. Just means your costs go down as scale goes up. But there are a lot of subtleties to it, because it's often non-linear. But I won't get into that. And then of course there are network economies, which are terribly important. You're on Facebook because I'm on Facebook. And it's valuable because you're on it and I'm on it both. And so each additional user adds value, and that creates, and so somebody trying to create an alternate to Facebook has to face that critical mass problem, which is a terrible thing to overcome. That's one type of power. And another one is switching costs. So if you, often truer in B2B businesses, so if you create a situation where a company's product becomes very much part of your process or something, it's hard to change it out. So imagine SAP, for example, would be a good example of that. So it's so embedded in your business that thinking of switching it out is high. So these are things that I just want to emphasize something really important here, because these are things that if you have them, it prevents or inhibits competitive arbitrage. So you can end up with this long period of very nice returns, and that's a good thing. But I also want to point out the genotypes. There are only 7 of them, which is nice, but exactly how they get established and the details of them are complex, idiosyncratic, non-obvious sometimes, and so that's why somebody like me just can't come in and say do this and do that, and you'll sort of make lemonade out of lemons. It's that an inventor has to create this over time.
Thank you very much, Hamilton. Perhaps I'm going to translate in a few words very quickly. So the first idea, la première idée, c'est le contre-positionnement. Donc ça, c'est une loi très subtile qui fait qu'on va utiliser un peu comme dans le karaté ou comme le tai chi, la force de l'autre. C'est-à-dire qu'il a pris l'exemple de Tesla, où en fait, il y a tous les constructeurs automobiles qui sont 10 fois plus forts que Tesla. Mais Tesla, parce qu'il s'est positionné complètement différemment, en faisant une voiture complètement électronique, eh bien, plus les autres essayent de l'attaquer, plus lui, il est renforcé. Et ça, le contre-positioning, c'est un peu contre-intuitif, parce qu'on se dit, mais qu'est-ce que c'est que tout ce petit canard noir qui ne sait même pas marcher? Et en fait, c'est justement du fait que c'est un signe noir, que c'est quelqu'un atypique par rapport à une industrie mature comme l'automobile, que Tesla peut prendre une position majeure. Et le deuxième, Olivier, c'est quoi qu'il a dit? Le deuxième, alors il y avait le contre-positioning, et le deuxième, alors on va voir si les personnes ont bien écouté en français.
La network economy.
Ah voilà, alors la network economy, alors merci, alors on voit que vous écoutez bien. La network economy, c'est justement les réseaux, c'est justement les écosystèmes innovants. Et ça, c'est un point extrêmement important que Hamilton a souligné, c'est effectivement la puissance de créer un écosystème innovant. Toutes les grandes réussites de la Silicon Valley, ce n'est pas des sociétés, croire que c'est des entreprises au sens classique du terme, c'est une grosse erreur. C'est toujours des gens qui ont construit des écosystèmes autour d'eux, une puissance incroyable, et c'est une de leurs forces qui fait que l'Europe n'arrive pas du tout à les rattraper, c'est leur écosystème. Par exemple, Apple, c'est des milliers, des dizaines de milliers, des centaines de milliers d'employés, mais c'est des millions d'informaticiens qui travaillent pour Apple pour faire des petites apps en freelance, pour compléter l'écosystème d'Apple. C'est ça la puissance d'Apple, c'est pas simplement les gens qui travaillent chez Apple, mais c'est tout l'écosystème que Apple a su créer autour de lui. So I return in English. Dear Hamilton, perhaps tell us the future. Tell us what you are doing now. You just explain us how you moved to be a professor, a humble professor of Stanford, to one of the most wealthy fund in America. That interests us.
Yeah, so I run an investment fund, which is successful, but not as magnificent as Michelle would say, and that's based on simply looking at companies in early technology stage and trying to figure out if they have one of these structures, and it's very hard to figure out at that stage. And so if you can figure it out and you're confident of it, it turns out to be something that turns out creates a lot of alpha in the investment lingo. And so I do that with it. I have a team, a company that does that. And I continue to interact very extensively with the tech community, founder community in Silicon Valley. Many of them seek me out for investment advice. I'm sorry, for strategy advice, and that's such a pleasure for me because as I say, to me, the vitality of an economy depends on that, and it's such fun, full of energy, really into their businesses, extremely thoughtful, fun to talk to. There tend to be fanatics about my book, which is always a flattering and a delight. So that's how I spend my time. So it's been which is a pleasure. Let's see, Michelle. I've lost my volume.
Oh, no, sorry. It is. I forget to push the button. Big sorry. Yes, Hamilton. I have to say that even if you are one of the senior person in the Silicon Valley, you are still very active. And last time we had the breakfast together, it was a breakfast around a young executive, very young, around perhaps 25, who are already a multi-millionaire. Can you tell me, as an example, it is a newcomer in the Silicon Valley. It was about a card, especially the Visa card.
Sure.
Visa card.
That was Enrique, who's the founder of Brex.
Brex, yes. And can you speak a little about Brex on our meeting?
Yeah,
it was fascinating. I should start right from the front.
A wonderful guy and sort of classic Silicon Valley. He's from Brazil and had an early successful career. I think even as a teenager in Brazil as an entrepreneur and got in trouble with his parents, I think, because he was I think developing a fintech company or something. And anyway, so he came to Silicon Valley because that's a place where you could. It was easier to get the right resources and scale and so on. And so he has a business that's focused around remaking the credit card business in a way that's more appropriate for businesses. So you integrate all the accounting stuff and makes it all much more seamless for people and easy to use. And that's been, I don't know what, I think they're valued now at 3 or 5 billion or something, and so a very, very successful, and as you say, it's 25 something, I was amused at another, there's a fintech company or Stripe, who's the founders of that, also very successful. I don't know, they're valued at 70 billion now, I think. And the founder of that, Patrick, would come to my class at Stanford every year and talk to my students, and he was almost their age. And so those are the sorts of people that are around, and this environment allows them to develop their ideas very quickly.
Thank you very much, Hamilton. So we just arrived to the time of question. So do you have any question? Avez-vous quelques questions? C'est le moment de poser la question à $1 million.
Yes, a few questions. Good morning, Hamilton.
Bonjour.
Bonjour. Yes. We enter now in a time of transition, transformation, a challenge with climate, societal issue, and so on. Is your 7 powers still relevant for this new period or more relevant?
My long intellectual journey was to try to construct these concepts that were more or less timeless. And so as far as I know, I'm always looking for an 8th or 9th power, but I probably did a couple hundred consulting cases of strategy. My students probably pulled together maybe another couple hundred studies of companies. And as far as I know, that covers them all. So it's as far as I know, they apply to all companies at all times in all geographies. And so I don't think I think they're relatively orthogonal to current events. Now it is true that in certain instances, certain types of power are more likely. And so if you're in an early stage, obviously branding isn't something that makes any sense because it takes a long time to develop that brand reputation. But that's always been true and is true now.
Okay, thank you. Your approach is the art of innovation ecosystems, and we are talking now about transformation ecosystem. And do you think in 10 years we will have the same ecosystem in another form, or could we see a new kind of ecosystem in other places appears in the future?
So do you mean by ecosystem, do you mean something like Silicon Valley, or what ecosystem are you talking about?
Yes, like Silicon Valley, but we have no Silicon Valley, but maybe in the future we can have other Silicon Valley in another kind of form.
You know, I'm, as you may know, my background is an economist, and I was lucky to study under one of the great thought leaders in this area, a guy by the name of Richard Nelson. And what you learn in the study of economic history is things come and go, right? And so the network effects that drive tech in Silicon Valley, or entertainment in Hollywood, or finance in New York are very powerful, and it takes quite a change for them to happen someplace else. But eventually they will. And you know, right now there's this fright in California that everybody's leaving for Austin, Texas, and that's sort of, you know, so these things happen over time, but it takes to build what economists call agglomeration economies, which are really network effects, geographically constrained network effects. It takes time to develop an ecosystem, but I'm sure it's possible and difficult, and it will happen, but it will take time. So that's a very fuzzy answer, but that's my view of economic history is like that. And a new industry can lead something like that. So if you get a completely different technological approach, sometimes you can create a center like that. So for example, in this country, Microsoft just making the decision to be in Seattle because that's where Bill Gates was from, and things start in that level of idiosyncraticness, you know, that it's that idiosyncratic. Somebody is doing something, you know, and it comes back to Michelle's thing about creativity. Somebody's doing something amazing that's creative and starting something. That's the seed that starts these things happening, and then people build stuff around that. And so people say, oh, well, there are a lot of software engineers in Microsoft. Let's do a location there. And so So it's not something that you sort of plan and develop. It's something that happens, I think, primarily because there's something powerful, entrepreneurial that seeds it. And if you go back in the entertainment industry in Hollywood, you know, it started out elsewhere, right? Florida, I think. And then there were some people that sort of got located in California. So there's this idiosyncratic part for the entrepreneur, and then you start to develop these network effects over time.
Thank you very much for your details answer, Hamilton.